So thank you so much for being with us this evening for the post-film program for Marry Me However. This evening and the film are supported by the Weintraub Israel Center and J Pride. We do have a door prize this evening that will be announced later on towards the end of our program. And I want to make sure to take the opportunity to thank our film festival committee who works tirelessly year-round at crafting the festival and post-film programming. I'd also like to thank our sponsors as well as our community partners. It's now my pleasure to introduce Lynn Davis, JCRC Jewish Community Relations Council, who will be moderating this evening's conversation. So Lynn, I'm going to bring you up to spotlight and take it away.
Wonderful. Jennifer, thank you so very much. And thank you to the Tucson International Jewish Film Festival for inviting me here this evening. It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you and be able to moderate this panel. I want to introduce the panelists, and I'll give them a moment to talk about themselves. We have with us tonight Rabbi Steve Greenberg. He is an Orthodox rabbi, educator, writer, and speaker who has led the call for LGBTQ inclusion in the Orthodox world. He's the author of the award-winning book, Wrestling with God and Men, Homosexuality in the Jewish Tradition, for which he won the Koret Jewish Book Award for Philosophy and Thought in 2005. Rabbi Greenberg is the founding director of Eshel, an Orthodox LGBT community support, education, and advocacy organization. We also have with us Motti Salzberg, who is a clinical social worker in private practice who specializes in the treatment of sexual and other traumas. He formerly worked in Jewish education with both adults and children. He has 4 children from his first marriage and currently lives with his partner in Maplewood, New Jersey. And Miryam Kabakov is a national leader who has worked for more than 3 decades in the inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals in the Orthodox world. She edited a collection of writings about the challenges and joys of LBT Orthodox Jews entitled Keep Your Wives Away from Them, Orthodox Women, Unorthodox Desires, which won the Golden Crown Literary Award. Miryam is currently the executive director of Eshel. We're going to start with Miryam, and I invite her to tell us a little bit more about what brings you to this work, what brings you to this space tonight.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. I told somebody I was going to be at the Tucson International Jewish Film Festival tonight, and they were like, "Oh my God, you're getting out of this horrible weather." It is absolutely treacherous here on the East Coast. I wish I was in Tucson, but we're delighted to be here by Zoom. And I'll tell you all a little bit about what we do at Eshel. Eshel is an organization that was originally created for the purpose of bringing together LGBTQ and Orthodox people to find each other, to make community, and to realize that they have a community and they have a future if they build it together. We later branched out into, a few years later, into working with parents of LGBTQ Orthodox people, and then rabbis and schools and summer camps. And we have a warm line, so people call us when they need something, help, support. We have a lot of support systems in place for people who are coming out in the Orthodox community. And I'm happy to say we just had our first in-person retreat for our LGBTQ community after 3 years of not meeting, and we're just coming off of that this past weekend. I'm still recovering, and I'm still on a very big high from it, and I'm happy to see some folks here tonight. So yeah, so that's basically what we do, and we've been working with getting this film out into the world for over 1.5 years, I want to say. It did come out in 2020, so maybe it's been over 2 years. And having panels, post-film discussions about, how people's lives are, being altered by the fact that they can't actually be who they are in the process of finding someone to marry, and how people have rabbis and communities have closed their eyes to the fact that they're queer people who are entering heterosexual relationships, and how that's unfair to everybody. Most of all, the person who they're marrying. And we've had some post-film discussions with an ex-spouse who's come on and talked about what the experience is like of being married to a gay man. So, and we're hoping that us getting the word out about this will really get into communities that are still arranging such marriages. So.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite Motti to speak next, but I neglected to invite our viewers, our participants. If you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. You can put it to everyone. If you're feeling bold, you could address it to me or you could address it to Jennifer, and Jennifer will share it with me over the course of the program. Motti Salzberg, tell us a little bit about how you came to this project and what brings you to this work.
Sure. So again, thank you. And I echo Miryam saying I wish I was in the warm weather in Tucson in person, but it's wonderful to be here on Zoom. So, your bio mentioned mainly my clinical background. And while, the work of Eshel and specifically the topic of this movie is reflected somewhat in my professional life, this is really, for me, this movie is deeply personal. I could have very much been one of the subjects in this documentary. The only difference being the country I grew up in. I grew up in the American, what we would call black hat or ultra-Orthodox Haredi community at a time when no one talked about these things. I grew up at the height of the AIDS crisis. And I entered the world of dating for, it's not exactly arranged marriage. It's called shidduch dating, where it's, you're set up with people and you date intensely in a short period of time with pretty firm rules, but I did not have the space or the ability to articulate this truth about myself, that I was gay, let alone to the person I was dating. And we got married in short order. We had 4 children. We were married for 8.5 years before the marriage ended. And the pain and the impact of the secrecy and the silence and the denial of the men and the women depicted in the movie to articulate their truth, to live their truth, and the impact it then has on their spouses is very much my lived story. And as Miryam said, and more is my ex-wife's lived story. And the legacy of that, the legacy of not letting people be who they are, say who they are, I can tell you in my own family, my 4 children are now adults, and it has profoundly impacted not just their mother, but it has profoundly impacted them. Their story is their story, but the last thing I want to share before we move on is, my oldest daughter has given me permission to speak a little bit about her story. And all those years later, even after we got divorced, the community still did not allow me to come out in the traditional sense. And in many ways, I was still closeted. And Eshel for me was a lifeline. And I was at that first Eshel retreat 13 years ago. And it truly was a lifesaver at a dark period in my life. But in the community we were raising our kids in, we were both closeted, and my ex-wife did not have an Eshel. So for her, there was more secrecy, more shame. And the impact of my daughter in late adolescence, finding out the secret that I felt I had to keep, even though I didn't want to, and even though I paid this terrible price for keeping initially, it destroyed her. It really hurt our relationship. She didn't speak to me for over 2 years because she didn't know who to blame besides me. And it took her a long time to piece together that it was the community, which then affected her relationship to the community, her relationship to Judaism. So this is a deep, deep wound that the impact of not allowing young people when they're, getting to know themselves and then seeking out partners and marriages, particularly in communities that have a template. You grow up, you date, you get married, you have children, move on. Is deeply personal. And I've worked with Eshel, I volunteered for Eshel over the years. And when I was asked to serve on these panels, to me, nothing could be more important than using my family's story as a way to try to shift things in the Orthodox community, particularly in segments that, as Miryam said, the message of this movie hasn't necessarily penetrated yet.
Thank you for that. There is so much there. And, my thanks to your daughter for her willingness to share that story, because that really, impresses upon people that this is generational trauma in ways slightly different than we're used to talking about it. But we'll get to all of that. But thank you, all of you, for sharing your stories and your words. Rabbi Greenberg, your turn.
Well, I just want to reiterate my thanks first to the Tucson Jewish Film Festival and to Rabbi Mordechai Vardi, who put together this really beautiful and challenging film. So my connection to it is that I grew up a kid in a conservative home in Columbus, Ohio, and I knew there was something dangerous about my inner life, but I didn't have the words for it. And finally, I ended up in the Shabbos table of an Orthodox rabbi, and I was swept away by learning and by the community there. And the truth is that my attraction to Orthodoxy was surely not made difficult by the restrictions on sexual expression, because while all my friends were running around and engaging in adolescent discovery, I had an excuse why I wasn't. Here I was becoming a religious kid, and the prohibition on touching girls was just a lifesaver in a certain way. And so teenage sexuality was just not on the table, and I could fool myself that there wasn't anything wrong with me. I was just religious. I went off to yeshiva in Israel, to Yeshiva University, and then to yeshiva in Israel. And when I was in Israel, it broke through at the age of 20. And I realized I was attracted to another guy in yeshiva. I had repressed this very successfully for many years. And so I was scared, and I went to a right-wing Orthodox rabbi outside of my community in the more modern Orthodox yeshiva world, Rav Yoshiv. And I sat in front of him and I said, Master, I'm attracted to both men and women, which is how I understood myself at the age of 20. What should I do? And he gave me the most beautiful answer. He said, Yididi Yikari, my dear one, my friend, Yesh lecha koach ahava pi shnayim, you have twice the power of love. Tishtamesh b'zeh b'zehirut, use it carefully. And so I spent the next 15 years excited that I became a rabbi. I began to kind of teach, and I was part of these communities, and I dated women up the wazoo, trying to demonstrate to myself that I, maybe was a bisexual, but I could do this. So here's my connection to this film is that in the absence of any future, it is easier to default to fantasy. So that is what I did. I spent 15 years fantasizing what other people wanted me to become, and what I myself wanted I wanted a family. I wanted that community. I wanted the belonging. So I dated for 15 years. I couldn't say the words, I am gay, to myself, because the moment I said them, I'd be standing on a cliff with there would be no further step, because there would be no future to actually walk toward. All the futures that were gay, at least in my world, were terrifying, if not deadly. And so this film is about providing young people, even at an early age, not only at the age of 20, but at the age of 12, with the awareness that there are gay people in our community, and they too have life arcs and good lives and good futures, and potentially love and companionship as well. And that in the absence of that vision, then people are forced to choose impossible circumstances that harm them and others.
Thank you. It's beautiful. And I wrote down that piece about, having 2 times the power of love, use it carefully. I think those are wise words for everyone. I found it interesting that you said that, this path, at one point, the path toward a gay life, an honest life, would be deadly. And I think that's an interesting choice of words, because I think most of us know that the risk of suicide, the risk of self-harm, is so high among especially LGBT and trans youth, who aren't celebrated, accepted, supported. And if I'm not throwing this out to any one of you in particular, but if one of you or all of you talk a little bit about what it looks like to create inclusive Jewish spaces, and what advice would you have for the people in this room, for us to carry back to our communities? Where could we find the tools to be, better stewards and the kind of people who could nurture inclusive community?
I think, having lived this arc for the last 49 years of my life, but especially navigating my post-divorce life, I would say a few points. Number one, stop making people keep secrets. You can only really reflect on things in hindsight. And one of the most damaging aspects of the secrecy wasn't just that I couldn't articulate to myself, as Rabbi Greenberg eloquently said, that I am gay, let alone to other people before I got married. It was that even after I got divorced for being gay, I felt in the Orthodox community, particularly the more right-wing Orthodox community, that I still couldn't say the words. That my presence in the community was predicated on continuing to keep the secret from my children. And everybody knew, like, that's the thing too, in hindsight. So it was a very, for lack of a better way to put it, it was a very strange don't ask, don't tell situation, but extremely toxic and caustic. Because living in those spaces where you can't share basic information about yourself. I worked in Jewish education, and there was this thought in my head, if they find out, I will be fired. They did find out. I wasn't fired, but that was not a simple process. But it went even deeper than that. When I met my now husband and I was still teaching in the school, I stopped sharing anything about myself because I had to edit. What did you do over the weekend? Got edited. Where did you go on vacation? Got edited. And I was everybody's best friend because I was forced to become a great listener because I didn't want to talk about myself. But I worked at a school for 10 years. The day I left was the day I never went back. I never spoke to anyone after because I didn't want to navigate this dramatic after moment, and nobody ever really knew me. So I think the first thing that I would say is let people speak their truths. You don't have to agree with every choice I made, but stop making young people deny certain reality, edit themselves, because I don't think someone who's not in that position really can understand how toxic it is. I had a conversation with a relative one time where they were like, why do you have to mention Josh, right, my husband? And I was so frustrated, and I said to them, I said, do me a favor, take a piece of paper, carry it around with you all day, and just make a little tick every time you say my husband or his name. And I want you to look at the paper after 24 hours and then see how difficult it would be if every one of those instances you had to edit it out. That's number one. I think the second thing is, it's really building on this first point, welcome people into your specifically Jewish spaces. As you mentioned in the beginning, I now live in Maplewood, New Jersey. And when we moved here, and this was the first home my husband and I bought together, I called the Orthodox shul and said, I have an Orthodox son. I'm done with shul, but I need to have a shul for him to go to. How welcoming are you? I'm never going to be there. And the woman I spoke to, who's now a good friend, she was like, no, we're not like that. It's different. And I said, I'm sorry, been there, done that. But the truth is that the shul in my community is different. And they didn't just say, yes, come, we accept you. They gave me an aliyah. It's hard to find a minyan some weeks. Last week, I ended up not just getting the aliyah, but being the gabbai. They wanted a home to host a shul event in. They called us without a loaded, and the biggest and pleasant surprise of the last 2 years of my life is that I'm now an active member of a shul. I'm not asking you to give me your halachic, Jewish legal opinion of my marriage. I understand we can agree to disagree. This is a very right-wing rabbi and a very right-wing rabbi's wife. But we're members of the shul. Our reality is our reality, and that's okay. And it's such a small, simple thing, but it's given me back something that I never thought I would have again.
Thank you. Miryam, is there anything
Yeah.
that you hear from members of the Eshel community in addition to the things that Motti shared that would make Jewish spaces more inclusive and more welcoming?
Yeah, so just like the converse of what Motti is saying is that, first of all, let me just highlight the burden of a secret. It's a tremendous burden. It is, talk about mental health. That's really something that really wears on you and is exhausting to keep secrets. But I think the converse of like not having any language to express yourself or to understand who you are even is to give language. So it's up to us in the Jewish community and specifically in Orthodox places to have language from the pulpit, the rabbi being able to say, it is also like what Motti's saying, so simple, like instead of say husband and wife, saying partners. That signals something to the people in the community, and little tweaks like that matter a lot, and allowing full participation, just like anybody else, obviously is the goal. Eshel's mission is so that people can live in Orthodox communities where they want to live, and without hiding. But in order to do that, you need to give language. So, and one interesting shift that I've seen over the years that we've been doing this since the beginning of Eshel, we would always hear, if an Orthodox rabbi was willing to talk to us in the beginning, it was very hard to even have the dialogue. It was always homosexual, homosexual this, homosexuality that, same-sex attraction, all these, words that were kind of like old, antiquated, and associated with mental health, mental illness. And to hear over the past 13 years, a shift in people, rabbis saying LGBTQ, that's huge. They're acknowledging nuance and that it's not a pathology in the language. So, I think that's important. It's an important first step, and it's taken us a long time, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So I think most of what should be said was said by by Motti and Miryam, but I would say just one other thing, and that it's related to how we began this, is that a lot of schools are really doing better jobs of making sure kids don't get bullied, and improving on language and using proper pronouns when kids, ask for them, and providing a special bathroom for the trans or genderqueer kids. But they still don't know how to portray what Jewish communal life will look like when they are adults. It's hard to educate a child when you cannot describe to them what you're hoping they achieve in their lives. What frameworks how their adulthood deploy? How will they be part of a thriving community and contribute to it? And so there's this missing piece of like helping to shape queer futures that are really religiously vibrant, that is kind of still missing. And it's that area, I think, that needs the most. I mean, clearly in many places, we still need to protect kids because they're vulnerable. But increasingly, that's just not enough. We really actually need a plan for their adult lives that at least that from the back, you don't need to talk about marriage in order for the young people to assume that you're preparing them for lifelong committed relationships because that's what you're living in. So there's got to be some way of portraying a future for kids, even when they're 12.
Yeah, I think that's very poignant. I mean, that's yeah, thank you for that. Miryam, you mentioned 13 years ago how difficult it was to get an Orthodox rabbi to talk to you, or to talk to Eshel and folks doing this work. And I was struck watching the film, that there is this very candid conversation with a couple Orthodox rabbis, and the film on the whole struck me as being both very risky and very brave. And I think, because of those two things, serves a very important function, in this conversation and in this community. But could one of you speak a little bit about the challenges in getting it made? People willing to take these risks and to be on film and to share their stories and their opinions.
Well, I can tell you that the film that was prior to this, Mary, the Trembling Before God, that was in a way a kind of earlier, and it was 2001, so it was quite a while ago. It was extremely difficult to get people to agree to be part of that film, and many could not and were only in silhouette. In this case, Rabbi Vardy had a little easier time because most of the men in the film and the women had already resolved their issues and were open and out and wanted things to get better and therefore felt moved to do it. The hard thing was to get the Orthodox rabbis and the rabbaniot in the institutions that you saw responding to these people telling about their lives. The fact that was filmed is actually quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I think a very important thing for people to see.
And
you mentioned,
sorry,
yeah,
if I can just add, but I think that there has been a shift. I can, and Rabbi Greenberg and Miryam can both talk about this. I've grappled with this myself, so the shift is happening. I would not have been on this panel 5 years ago, and I certainly wouldn't have identified as much personal information as I feel comfortable with today. And I think that that is a general shift in all segments of the Orthodox population. You have recently two right-wing Orthodox institutions, one Nefesh, the primary mental health care organization for what I'll call right-wing Orthodoxy, that had parents of an LGBT son talk about their experience, that they've now started to help other parents from that community grapple with this. There's another major supportive organization for that segment of the Orthodox community whose children are kind of leaving the path in whatever way, but they've had multiple breakout sessions for parents working with LGBT kids. I think there's been a groundswell of parents, and a lot of this is generational, right? So I am now the age of the parents of the LGBT kids, and the parents, to their credit and enormous courage, they're not willing anymore to sacrifice their children on the altar of the community. And I think that that's been a big shift dynamically. That's kind of, forcing, I would say, but in the best way, the rabbis to confront it. And, it's interesting, Miriam noted the language shift before. That's very, very true. At this Nefesh convention, to hear LGBT and not homosexual was pretty groundbreaking, but it definitely does signify something.
Well, and if I may, I mean, that focus or that attention being paid to families, that's a type of inclusion as well. I noticed recently that at the Jewish Federations of North America, folks doing the Jedi work, their Jewish equity, diversion, and inclusion work, talk about LGBTQ Jews and their loved ones, or Jews with disabilities and their loved ones, and this acknowledgement that kind of back to the generational thing. I mean, this affects a person very profoundly, but there are ripple effects into a family, into a community, and that everyone is touched either by ostracism and rejection or by efforts at inclusion and acceptance.
Right.
And I was thrilled to see that on Eshel's website, there's a place for parents of Orthodox parents of LGBTQ individuals, so that work is getting expansive.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was agreeing with you. And
okay.
just to say that
it was from the audience.
When we do the math, like the percentage of LGBTQ identified people there are, within the Orthodox community, we come up with a number of something like 50,000 in America. But then you add the parents and the siblings and the cousins and the aunts and the uncles, and so it's like everybody knows somebody now who's LGBTQ, because kids are coming out younger and younger. The average age used to be 23 like 15 years ago, and now it's 16. And it's true also in the Orthodox community. So every educator, I just spoke this morning to a bunch of educators in Boston. Everybody in the schools, all the educators knows a kid or more than one child who's coming out. So yeah, there are definitely ripple effects, and it's something you can't really ignore. I mean, it's a small population, maybe within a small population of Jews, but it becomes significant when you can't talk about it and when it affects people's lives. And our parents, the reason why I think we're so successful with our parent community as well is because, much like their children, when their kids come out to them, the parent is in shock and they go into the closet about this secret and they carry this burden around and they have no one to talk to. So we provide a space where people can actually talk to each other and meet each other. And it's tremendous relief. And it's just an interesting parallel how they experience the carrying of the secret and the shame and losing your friends and worrying about losing your community. So yeah, it's a very, bonding experience, I think, for the parents and the kids once they can start talking again.
Yeah. We do have a question from the audience asking if you, and maybe this is directed at you, Miryam, if you could expand on the effect of the Orthodoxy on the marriages, on the women in these marriages. They felt like their pain was left out of the discussion, and I feel like it was touched on, certainly, but are there support groups? I mean, Motti mentioned, his ex-wife's isolation post-divorce. Yeah. Are those networks, those support groups growing as well?
So I'm not actually sure. We've attempted to have a few of those kinds of support groups. And I think we realize that for us, our most important work is to make it so that people don't need to keep secrets. And that's really, what we are focusing on allowing people to come out and before they get married. Motti can speak to the pain of an ex-spouse. It's incredibly painful. There are a few cases that I know where the divorce between the people was amicable because one spouse understood the other one's pain. But a lot of the times it's just like, it's shame, it's feelings of rejection. How could you have lived with me for so long with this lie? So our work is really in making it so that nobody has to lie. But there are some support groups for spouses of LGBTQ people, and they're really, really important. The difference between people coming out and being left by someone coming out is that when you come out, even though you may have torn apart, or played a part in tearing apart your family, not that it's not to blame, but there's a rainbow at the end of that tunnel. Do you know what I mean? There's like, okay, we're going to get you through this. We're going to make it so that you can live fully who you are. And yes, you're in pain, your kids are in pain, but there's something redemptive at the end of it. And when you're left, in a marriage, there's no pride parade at the end of that. So that's really my understanding of the ex-spouse's pain. Motti, you probably have more to say about that.
I have, yes, Miryam spoke very eloquently. I've lived it, and I have been extremely fortunate because my ex-wife is such an amazing person to have one of those amicable divorces. But Miryam encapsulated it perfectly. There's nothing, all the support that I had, all the phone numbers that I was given, all the places I could go doesn't exist for the spouse. And if very often, the person coming out like myself is making religious changes as well, the spouse might not necessarily want to do that, but then they're further locked into a community where they can't speak the truth. When Rabbi Vardy was on a lot of these panels, I said my only critique of the movie is that it doesn't highlight the spouse's pain enough. Because I think that I know that because of my own shame and guilt, it took me a long time to tune into my ex-wife's experience. I selfishly protected myself from that because of I couldn't face the enormity of what I did, even with all the self-forgiveness and understanding why it happened, how it happened. But when I allowed myself to see that is the ultimate catastrophe here. I knew I had a secret. Maybe I couldn't articulate it fully to myself. Maybe I couldn't, face the abyss of what it would mean if I would acknowledge it, if I wouldn't go through with the planned trajectory of my life. My ex-wife had no insight whatsoever. She took me for what I presented myself to be. She was a healthy woman with dreams and aspirations in every aspect of the marriage, and that got shattered. And no one does speak to that. She just texted me. She's actually watching the panel tonight. She's not ready to come forward and speak, but she is in the Zoom room. I can't speak to her pain, but not because I don't know it. I think I do at this point, but I can't do it justice. But to the person who pointed that out, you're absolutely correct. Because I had a process, I had a support group. I had so much waiting for me, and she did not. She had more secrecy, more loneliness, more pain, not to mention just the shattering of everything that she had thought her life was.
Thank you. Rabbi Greenberg, tell us a little bit how the film has been received across the US and in Israel and in different Jewish circles.
Rabbi Vardy has taken this film in Israel into some educational settings, and it's been useful mostly in Israel because we're still eager to kind of see this move to the US. It hasn't quite yet for various reasons, but the film has been available in Israel for young people who are coming out to their parents to say, Ima, Abba, I'm gay. And when they say, yes, but don't you want to get married? And what are you going to do? How am I going to not have grandkids and blah, blah. And they show this film in order to communicate to their parents that just getting married is not the solution here. And so it has helped families reconcile. And we're hoping that when it's available in a format that we can use it for that purpose, that it can travel in very religious communities where people don't have easy ways of explaining their experience, and the film might do a better job than they feel they can do themselves in explaining why it is that it would be a grave error just to force themselves into marriage. Because usually what the traditional folks will say is, really, is sex more important than having 6 kids and having the love of a family? Like, really? Do you really need sexual satisfaction? Like, is that really what you're going to give up? Like, you're going to give up all this for just that? They don't understand the deep psychological, emotional issues that have to do with much more than the physical experience of sex. So I think the film helps in that regard in an interesting way.
And I think the film helps viewers in that regard as well, because I don't think I'm just speaking for myself, but I think many film festival viewers don't have a lens or an insight I think have, a pretty superficial grasp or image of Orthodoxy and modern Orthodoxy and Haredi Orthodoxy. And so people have had, LGBTQ family members and children and parents and maybe even spouses in this broader secular community, and are, probably, I assume, to some degree aware of the attendant struggles. And then you're adding another layer of, a tighter community, a smaller community, a more restrictive community in many ways. And, Motti talked a little bit about how identity is so wrapped up in all of that. And I think for viewers, it's another perspective. And I think it's a gift, a privilege to gain some of that insight as well.
Well, let me just add one feature, which, after the description of how difficult it is to be a wife in Orthodox environments, and indeed a woman in general, it's hard to actually sell this point very much. But I just want to say that among the things that this film demonstrates is how precious it is to people to belong, how rich the intellectual, spiritual, and emotional ties are, how much they love the tradition that they feel they're being excluded from, and how much they're going to risk in order to remain inside it. So, because part of the real question that secular folks ask is like, why not leave? And the answer that these people would often say is, it's like, you want me to, like, this is as much part of me as my inner life and my desires. It's so deeply precious to me. I can't leave it. But moreover, one other thing is important from Eshel's perspective. And that is, it used to be that you were either silent, you were celibate, or you fooled around quietly and stayed, or you spoke out and you left. What is changing is people are demanding to stay and not to be silent. And the reason that's powerful is, you only get to change what you love. If you leave it, you abandon your ability, and maybe graciously let it continue on its own, but it's not for me. And I get when people make that choice. We have no hesitation to support people if that is their choice. But if the tradition is going to be responsible to the broader realities of the human condition, and therefore retain its claim to not be a club for straight folks, but a world religion of profundity, depth, and meaning, then it's got to deal with this question. And it's only when queer people remain in the community that is possible.
I want to say thank you. Yes, I'm so glad you said that, Stephen. Everything that you just said, I agree with. I would also just say, though, that to stay and be truly who you are and be rejected on a daily basis has got to be one of the most painful things that I've ever experienced. So I never encourage people to stay if it feels like it's bad for them. But that is why we invest so much in our parent community, because in some ways they feel the rejection of their kid and they feel the rejection of their, family as a whole sometimes. But a lot of the parents we work with are very strong members of their community. They're board members of their synagogues, and they're the ones who can stay and speak up. And, it's a slow process. It's often quiet. It's just one-on-one with the rabbi and the parents, maybe in the synagogue. But that is the way changes, we believe, will happen. Also, like those are the people that I feel good about telling, yes, you guys, we're going to support you in staying and speaking up and giving you the language to use to make that argument.
Yeah.
I can't say anything more eloquently than Rabbi Greenberg and Miryam just did, but something also, I think, when you speak about the black and white, so be married, give up on the sex, so leave the community, why do you have to be here? These are complex relationships. You don't just, like Steve said, if you love something, you can't just walk away. And the power of a movie like this and the power of Eshel is to highlight the deep complexity here. There are so many aspects of my connection to this community. And a marriage is so much more than just the optics and the space to raise children to continue the community. And when we don't let people speak to all of that and be all those different pieces, and it's painful and it's difficult, and I echo Miryam, it has been the most painful experience of my life, but also, and thanks in a large part to Eshel, I've also seen changes that I never would have thought possible. And if people like Rivardi and the people in the movie and people like Miryam and Steve would not be doing this, it would be back where I started. But the length of time that I've navigated this means that I've experienced a lot of pain, but I've also seen the arc of change front and center. And that's, I think the other piece is hope. People need hope.
I'm going to tell a quick story. I was just at the Prisma conference, So I'm going there to kind of speak to the educators who in schools where we can do training, in order to help them deal with young people who come out of the closet or various challenges similar to that. And I see a man. He's my first encounter. Black hat, black coat, white shirt, and he looks scary because he's got a long, gray beard. And like, why am I? But I'm going to push myself. I say, "Who are you?" He tells me he's from a very Haredi community, and then he says, "Who are you?" And I tell him what I do. And then he says, "Boy, do I want to talk to you." And I was like so taken aback how serious he was in engaging these questions. He said, "Look, it's not easy for us. You know where we are." I want to say where he is or who he is, but then I said, but Rabbi, how did this happen that you are so ready to deal with this? And I speak to modern Orthodox rabbis, some of them who really aren't ready, but in some cases, like in your case, you are. How? Why? So he said to me the following. He said, until a few years ago, this wasn't true. But a few years ago, we all independently came to the conclusion that this is real. This is real. It's not an import from some other culture. It's not assimilation. It's not bad character. It's not mental illness. It's just the way people are. And the moment we understood that this is real, we got serious about treating people with dignity and respect, and we're still trying to figure out how to do it. But I want to talk to you, he said. So I think that is that's the change. The fact that it's real, that Motti was speaking, that is really a feature of the last few years.
Thank you. And that's a very optimistic note to start wrapping things up on. I want to thank each of you for your generosity, your humanity, the work that you're doing, for being so candid and open with all of us. I want to thank everyone in our audience, in our virtual audience, for being here to the Tucson International Jewish Film Festival. This, for me, is the power of film and the power of film festivals, right? It's these glimpses into lives that are not our own, and that may exist next door or down the street or halfway around the world, but we may not otherwise have the chance to experience them, however vicariously, and to learn a little bit and to stretch our empathy muscles and hopefully our allyship muscles and all those great things that will make stronger community, because that's why we're here. As a reminder, before I turn it over to Jennifer, any last words? I don't want to cut anyone off. We certainly have a few minutes, but such beautiful, eloquent things were said but if there's anything else you want to add, don't let me cut you off. If you look, Miryam's email is in the chat. Miryam, Miryam @eshelonline.org. I'm sure Jennifer Selko would be happy to share that with you. And are you eshelonline.org? Is that the URL? Okay.
Yes.
A quick Google will find them as well. If you have any questions about local resources for LGBTQ youth and their families, reach out to Jennifer, and she or I would be happy to point you in the right direction. Thrilled, actually. A limited number of films can be screened in person through January 22nd and virtually through the 31st. Tickets are available by calling the JCC or visiting tucsonjcc.org/film. Jennifer has a few more things and to add to wrap up, and I wish you all a good night. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So the door prize this evening is a copy of Rabbi Greenberg's book. And that copy will be going to Michelle Blumenberg. So we will get that to you. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening. And I want to hope everyone stays healthy, take care, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.